When I got promoted and was offered the position of director, my husband gave me a mocking smile. I don't care about your job. Tomorrow my mother and sister are moving in with us, and you'll be the one taking care of them. That's far more important than your career, he said. He went to pick them up, but when he came back home and saw what awaited him, he froze in shock. Before we continue, don't forget to write in the comments which country you're from and how old you are. Enjoy listening. The rain pounded against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our 32nd floor apartment, a relentless gray veil that blurred the glittering city skyline. I sat at the polished oak dining table, my laptop casting a soft blue glow across my face, the email still open on the screen. Congratulations, Sarah Thompson. We are thrilled to offer you the position of Director of Marketing at Pinnacle Enterprises. My heart raced, a wild mix of pride, disbelief, and exhilaration. At 32, after years of grinding, late nights fueled by coffee, weekends spent perfecting pitches, vacations sacrificed for deadlines, I'd done it. I was about to become one of the youngest directors in the history of Pinnacle, a global marketing firm that shaped campaigns for brands people worshipped. This wasn't just a promotion. It was the culmination of a dream I'd nurtured since I was a scrappy college intern, sketching campaign ideas in a dog-eared notebook. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment sink in. The apartment was quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain and the faint hum of the city below. Our home was my sanctuary, a sleek, modern space I'd curated with care, mid-century furniture, abstract art, a shelf of books that told the story of my ambitions. I couldn't wait to share the news with Mark, my husband of 5 years. I imagined his hazel eyes crinkling with that warm, boyish smile, his arms pulling me into a hug that smelled of cedar and coffee. He'd always been my biggest cheerleader, the one who'd stayed up with me during grad school, proofreading my papers, celebrating my first big break at Pinnacle. Or so I'd thought. I turned to the kitchen, where Mark was pouring himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light from the pendant lamps. "Mark!" I called, my voice bubbling with excitement. "You won't believe this. I got the promotion, Director of Marketing." He paused, the bottle hovering midair, then set it down with a deliberate clink on the granite countertop. His face didn't light up the way I'd imagined. Instead, his lips curled into a smirk, sharp, almost mocking, a look I'd never seen before. "Director, huh?" he said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. He took a slow sip, his eyes narrowing as he leaned against the counter, studying me like I was a stranger. "That's nice, Sarah, but I don't care about your job." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I blinked, my mind scrambling to process what I'd heard. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, certain I'd misheard him. He set the glass down, crossing his arms, his smirk deepening. "Tomorrow, my mother and sister are moving in with us," he said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "And you'll be the one taking care of them. That's far more important than your career." The room seemed to tilt, the edges of my vision blurring. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for the laugh that would break the tension and prove this was some cruel joke. But his expression didn't soften. That smirk lingered, and his eyes held a glint of challenge, as if daring me to push back. My mouth went dry, and a knot tightened in my stomach, twisting with a mix of confusion, anger, and something deeper, betrayal. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to keep it steady. "Dead serious," he replied, taking another sip of whiskey, his gaze never leaving mine. "Family comes first, Sarah. You'll see that soon enough." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the rain outside. I felt a surge of emotions: shock, rage, a creeping sense of loss. Mark had always been traditional, raised in a small town where gender roles were carved in stone. Men provided, women nurtured. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't just about his mother, Evelyn, or his sister, Clara, moving in. This was about control, about Mark trying to clip my wings just as I was learning to soar. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my thoughts a chaotic swirl. I closed my laptop with a soft click, stood, and walked to our bedroom, my steps measured, my hands trembling. Mark didn't follow. He stayed in the kitchen, sipping his whiskey, as if he'd just won some unspoken battle. The door to our bedroom clicked shut behind me, and I leaned against it, my breath shallow, my mind racing. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in our king-sized bed, the crisp white sheets cool against my skin, staring at the ceiling as the city lights cast faint shadows across the room. My mind replayed Mark's words, his smirk, the casual cruelty of his dismissal. "I don't care about your job." How had we gotten here? When we met 7 years ago at a mutual friend's gallery opening, Mark had been captivated by my ambition. He'd called me his firecracker, the woman who could light up a room with her ideas, her drive. He'd supported me through grad school, through my first big break at Pinnacle, through every late night and early morning. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. His comments about my long hours had grown sharper, his jokes about my corporate obsession less playful, more pointed. And now this, his mother and sister, moving in without so much as a discussion, with the expectation that I'd drop everything to play nursemaid. Evelyn was a force of nature, and not the good kind. At 62, she was a sharp-tongued widow who'd never hidden her disdain for my career. To her, a woman's place was in the home, cooking three-course meals, scrubbing floors, and catering to her family's every whim. She'd made it clear from the moment we met that she thought I was too modern, too focused on my job to be a proper wife to her son. Every family gathering was a battlefield. Her passive-aggressive comments about my work hours or my fancy city life cutting deeper each time. Clara, Mark's younger sister, was no better. At 28, she was a perpetual victim, flitting from one failed venture to another. Failed Etsy shops, failed influencer dreams, failed relationships, always expecting someone to pick up the pieces. The thought of them living here, in my meticulously curated apartment, filled me with dread. And the expectation that I'd be their caretaker, sacrificing my career to do so, that was a line I wouldn't cross. By 3 a.m., the initial shock had hardened into resolve. I wasn't the same woman I'd been when I married Mark. Timid, eager to please, afraid of rocking the boat. I'd fought too hard for my career, for my independence, to let anyone, not even my husband, tear it down. I thought about my younger self, the one who'd stayed up late in her dorm room, dreaming of leading campaigns that shaped the world. That girl deserved better than this. As the first rays of dawn crept through the blinds, painting the room in soft gold, I made a decision. Mark could bring his family here, but he wasn't going to dictate my life. Not anymore. The next morning, Mark was up early, already dressed in his navy blazer and jeans, his car keys jingling in his hand as he grabbed his coffee mug. "I'm heading out to pick up Mom and Clara," he said, not meeting my eyes, his voice clipped. "They'll be here by late afternoon. Make sure the guest room is ready." I nodded, keeping my face neutral, my hands wrapped around my own coffee mug. "Sure," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. He didn't notice the storm brewing behind my eyes, the fire kindling in my chest. He grabbed his jacket, gave me a curt nod, and walked out the door, the sound of it clicking shut, echoing in the quiet apartment. The moment he was gone, I sprang into action. This apartment was my sanctuary, my reward for years of hard work. I'd signed the lease before we got married, back when I was a rising star at Pinnacle, and Mark was still figuring out his career as a freelance graphic designer. His name wasn't on the lease, a detail I'd never thought much about until now. But today, it was my leverage, my shield. I started with the guest room, the one Mark had so casually designated for Evelyn and Clara. It was a spacious room with a queen bed, a sleek walnut dresser, and a cozy armchair by the window that overlooked the city. I stripped it bare. The decorative pillows, embroidered with delicate patterns, went into storage boxes. The plush throw blankets, the framed art prints of abstract landscapes, the scented candles I'd chosen for their calming lavender notes, all of it was packed away, neatly stacked in the hall closet. I dragged my desk from the corner of the living room into the guest room, its mahogany surface gleaming under the morning light. I set it up with my laptop, my awards, plaques and certificates from Pinnacle, each one a testament to my hustle, and a vision board I'd made years ago, back when I was a dreamer with big plans. It was covered in magazine clippings, quotes like, "Lead with courage," and "Own your future," and a photo of me at my first big client pitch, beaming with pride. By noon, the guest room was no longer a guest room. It was my office, a shrine to my ambition, a declaration that I wouldn't be erased. Next, I called a locksmith. A gruff man named Tony arrived within the hour, his toolbox clanking as he swapped out the front door's deadbolt for a new one, its brass surface gleaming with promise. "You sure about this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as he handed me the new keys, their weight cold and reassuring in my palm. "Absolutely," I said, slipping them into my pocket. Mark's key wouldn't work anymore, not until we had a real conversation, one where my voice was heard. By 2 p.m., I'd moved on to the legal side. I'd always been meticulous, a habit that served me well in my career. I pulled up the lease agreement on my laptop, my eyes scanning the fine print, confirming what I already knew. My name, and only my name, was on the document. I called Rachel, my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with a knack for cutting through corporate red tape. I'd worked with her on a few work contracts, and her sharp mind had always impressed me. "Sarah, if you're serious about protecting your space, you have options," she said, her voice crisp over the phone. "We can draft a notice of intent to evict, just in case things escalate. It's a precaution, but it's a strong one. I can have it ready by end of day." "Do it," I said, my voice steady, my resolve unshaken. I want to be ready for anything. By 4 p.m., the apartment was transformed. The fridge was stocked with my favorite foods: crisp kale salads, almond milk, dark chocolate with sea salt. Not the heavy, carb-laden dishes Evelyn insisted on, like meatloaf and mashed potatoes swimming in gravy. I changed the Wi-Fi password, a small but satisfying act of control, choosing a phrase that felt like a mantra. "Own Your Life 2025. And on the dining table, I left a single envelope addressed to Mark in my neat handwriting, the ink bold against the cream paper. Inside was a letter, one I'd spent an hour drafting to keep my emotions in check. It wasn't a rant or a plea, but a calm, clear statement of my truth. "Mark, I've spent years building a life I'm proud of. My career isn't just a job. It's who I am, a reflection of my dreams, my sacrifices, my strength. I won't let you or anyone else dismiss it. Your mother and sister are not my responsibility, and I won't be forced into a role I didn't choose. If you can't respect my boundaries, my choices, or my ambitions, then we need to reevaluate our future together. The locks have been changed. You can call me when you're ready to talk. Sarah." I stood back, surveying my work. The apartment felt different now, lighter, like it was mine again. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the city beyond the windows sparkled with possibility. I didn't know how Mark would react, but I was ready for anything. Or so I thought. At 6:17 p.m., I heard the unmistakable sound of a key rattling in the lock, followed by a frustrated grunt. Mark was back. I stood in the living room, arms crossed, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. The door didn't budge. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text. "What the hell, Sarah? Open the door." I didn't respond. Instead, I waited, listening as Evelyn's shrill voice pierced the quiet hallway. "This is outrageous. She can't lock us out of our own home. Who does she think she is?" Clara's softer, whiny tone followed, a litany of complaints about the long drive from their small town 2 hours away, her aching feet, her desperate need for a hot shower and a glass of wine. Mark pounded on the door, his fist heavy against the wood, the sound echoing like a drum beat. "Sarah, open this damn door right now." I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and opened the door just a crack, enough to see his flushed face, his hazel eyes blazing with anger. Behind him stood Evelyn, her lips pursed in a tight line, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun that matched her scowl. Clara hovered beside her, clutching a designer handbag, her eyes red and puffy from crying, her blonde curls disheveled from the journey. Their suitcases cluttered the hallway, a chaotic pile of expectations I had no intention of meeting. "Mark," I said, my voice calm but firm, my hand gripping the doorframe. "We need to talk. Alone." He didn't hesitate. He pushed past me, ignoring my request, his shoulder brushing mine as he stormed into the apartment. Then he froze. The guest room, now my office, was visible through the open door, my desk gleaming under the soft light, my awards lined up like trophies, my vision board a bold declaration of my dreams. The envelope on the dining table caught his eye, and he snatched it up, tearing it open with a ferocity that made my stomach clench. As he read, his jaw tightened, his eyes flicking between the letter and me, his knuckles white around the crumpled paper. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous, a growl that sent a shiver down my spine. "It's exactly what it says," I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I'm not your maid, Mark. I'm not your mother's caretaker or your sister's babysitter. I'm your wife, and I just got the promotion of a lifetime. If you can't respect that, we have a problem." Evelyn pushed her way inside, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, her presence like a storm cloud. "You ungrateful little—" she started, her voice dripping with venom, her finger pointed at me like a weapon. I cut her off, my tone ice cold, my eyes locked on hers. "This isn't your home, Evelyn," I said, each word deliberate, cutting through the tension like a knife. "It's mine, and I decide who stays here." The room went silent, the air thick with shock. Clara let out a small sob, muttering something about how unfair it all was, how she'd never been treated like this. She clutched Mark's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, but he didn't move. His face was a storm of emotions, anger, shock, maybe even a flicker of shame. For the first time, I saw him waver, his confidence cracking under the weight of my resolve. The next few hours were a battle of wills, a tense standoff that tested every ounce of my strength. Mark tried everything: anger, guilt, even a half-hearted appeal to my sense of family. He argued that his mother was still grieving the loss of his father, that Clara needed stability after her latest breakup, that I was being selfish, cruel, unfeeling. "You're my wife, Sarah," he said at one point, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "This is what families do. They take care of each other." "And what about me, Mark?" I shot back, my voice steady but laced with pain. "What about my dreams, my sacrifices, my life? You didn't even ask me. You just decided I'd give it all up to play housekeeper for your family. That's not a marriage. That's control." Evelyn was livid, her face red as she hurled insults about my selfish career, my cold heart, my failure as a wife. She paced the living room, her voice rising with every word, her hands gesturing wildly. Clara, predictably, dissolved into tears, clinging to Mark's arm, begging him to fix this, her voice a high-pitched whine that grated on my nerves. But I held firm, my back straight, my eyes never leaving Mark's. I wasn't backing down, not this time. Finally, I laid out my terms. Mark could stay, but only if he agreed to counseling, to a serious conversation about our future, to respecting my boundaries. Evelyn and Clara, however, were not welcome. Not now. Not like this. "This apartment is mine," I said, my voice unwavering. "If you can't accept that, you're free to leave with them." Evelyn scoffed, grabbing her suitcase. "Come on, Clara," she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. "We'll find a hotel. We don't need her charity." Clara followed, still crying, muttering about how she'd never forgive this betrayal. Mark hesitated, his eyes searching mine, but he didn't follow them. He stayed, the door closing behind his mother and sister with a heavy thud. That night, he slept on the couch, the space between us a chasm too wide to cross. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, the city lights painting patterns on the walls. Had I just saved my marriage, or ended it? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I'd reclaimed my voice, my power, my life. The next morning, I walked into Pinnacle Enterprises, my heels clicking on the polished marble floor of the executive suite. My team greeted me with applause, their smiles genuine, their excitement infectious. I stood at the head of the conference table, my new office just beyond the glass doors, a corner suite with a view that stretched across the city. For the first time in days, I smiled. A real, unguarded smile that felt like freedom. My phone buzzed as I prepared for my first meeting as director. It was a text from Mark. "Can we talk tonight? Just us." I didn't reply right away. I had a team to lead, a campaign to launch, a future to build. But as the day wore on, I thought about his message, about the man I'd married, about the life we'd tried to build together. Could we find a way back to each other? Or had we already drifted too far apart? The weeks that followed were a test of endurance, a slow unraveling of the life we'd known. Mark and I started counseling, a grueling process that forced us to confront the cracks in our marriage. He admitted he'd felt threatened by my success, that his mother's influence had clouded his judgment, that he'd been afraid of losing the traditional life he'd always envisioned. I admitted I'd been so focused on my career that I'd missed the signs of his growing resentment, the distance that had crept between us. We were honest, raw, sometimes brutal, but we were trying. Evelyn and Clara stayed away, their absence a quiet victory. I heard through mutual friends that they'd rented a small apartment in the suburbs, funded by Mark's reluctant contributions. They still called him daily, demanding his time, his money, his attention. But he was learning to set boundaries, slowly, imperfectly, but learning. I didn't care about their drama anymore. They weren't my problem. At Pinnacle, I thrived. The director role was everything I'd hoped for and more. Challenging, exhilarating, a chance to shape campaigns that made headlines. My team respected me, my ideas sparked innovation, and my confidence grew with every success. But I didn't lose sight of myself. I made time for friends, for yoga classes at dawn, for quiet evenings with a glass of wine and a novel that transported me to another world. I was building a life that was mine, not defined by anyone else's expectations. The story doesn't end with a neat bow. Life rarely does. Mark and I are still navigating our way forward, some days closer, some days further apart. There are moments when I see the man I fell in love with, the one who left me silly notes on the fridge, who danced with me in the kitchen to old jazz records, who believed in me before I believed in myself. Other times, I wonder if we've grown into different people, with dreams that no longer align. But one thing is certain. I'm not the woman I was when Mark mocked my promotion. I've learned to fight for what matters, to set boundaries, to never apologize for my ambition. As I sit in my office, the city skyline stretching before me like a canvas of possibilities, I know I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. The future is mine to shape, and I'm just getting started.